Hi there, and welcome back to another episode at Station Road. Now, as you probably, most of you have been following various videos recently, we're now going to sort of change tack and do something completely different. And today I'm actually going to be looking at how we could possibly model dry stone wall. And here in New Zealand, that's not a very common feature to see stone walls, but it seems to be quite prevalent over in the UK. Now, you could go out and buy a stone wall kit. I think Hornby do it. There's loads of different companies that do it, but more often than not, it's always just a straight section of stone wall. So how do you get around going through corners, over undulations in the landscape, and things like that? It just doesn't work. It's fine if you've just got a flat paddock and straight borders, but in this situation, what I'm actually going to do is add to our display diorama that I have here, which has had ballast, it's had fences, it's had grass and so forth added to it. We're now going to add some stone wall to it. So the method I'm going to use involves using polymer clay or putty, and there's essentially two types. There's this one here, and I'll bring in a close-up of that, is Ducit Make and Bake. Now this particular one, you shape it to the form that you want it to take, and then you pop it in the oven and bake it, and it goes nice and solid. So there is that version there, and then we have this air dry clay, which I'll bring a close-up shot of that. Is it's Janvier, or however that is pronounced. Now this is considerably cheaper than the oven baked clay, and the air dry, it means it just might be an easier method. And I think also DAS does a very similar one, terracotta colour. The colour doesn't really matter, this is just white, because essentially what we're going to do is we'll paint the stone wall afterwards. The next thing that I'm actually going to use, and I was sort of deciding which one to go for. Now in this jar here is actually quite coarse stone chip. Now this is actually a modelling product. Unfortunately, I can't remember who made it. It is now in a Gherkins jar, but I know that it was in a bag from a model shop, and it's quite coarse sort of stone product. And then in this jar we have kitty litter. Now this is really chunky litter, and there is fine bits in it, but then there's quite large chunky bits in it. And yes, I could smash it up a bit more, grind it up to make it smaller, but kitty litter, this particular one, is really dusty. And so as soon as you actually touch it and start using it, it just gets everywhere. So I'm putting it here as a representation. I'm not actually probably going to use this in this wee experiment, but it's just purely as an example. So what we actually have here now in terms of scale, I sort of did a bit of research on stone wall fencing or borders around the UK, and they all vary considerably. So some actually use quite small stones, and some use really quite large boulders. So what we've got here, and I'll just bring this into view, is we've got our wee Oro gauge figurine. As you can see, on the left we have the kitty litter, and on the right we have our model coarse gravel or stones. And you can clearly see that the kitty litter is probably really too big, whereas on the right hand side the model gravel or stone chips are definitely more proportionate. So I think that's what I'm going to use in this stone wall experiment.
Right, we'll start with this one first, because I do believe that this is actually going to work out easier and probably the better method. So the next step here, of course, is we'll get our stones out. And what I might do is, using one of these offcuts, is we're actually just going to see what happens when I squash this in here. So pound it in. What's it going to do? Not really working. So it's not, that hasn't really worked. I'm definitely going to have to use the glue. Interestingly enough though, it has made for an interesting texture. Of course that wouldn't really work because it's actually the reverse of what I actually want in terms of its formation. Yeah, it's created quite an interesting texture. So it's definitely a case of, I think, use some paint the surfaces in glue. I also actually think that probably what we actually need to do is lay this, rather than having it heaped up, is actually lay this the stones out so they're pretty much one level, and then sort of ease them in and fill in any gaps, and that way hopefully we're actually covering all the areas. Right, so let's give this a go and just see how well this works. So we've got some, I'm just using some PVA here, so we're just going to coat the outside of this. There's our house stone wall. So, you know, you've got bits poking out the bottom and things like that, but we'll just leave that for now, because what I might do is let that dry off before I actually do the top. Now, because this is air dry putty, it will harden eventually, but it is actually quite slow at hardening. And of course, the thicker the putty, the longer it takes for it to air dry. Right, so let's have a look at this stuff, and I just don't know whether this is going to work as well. And this is the oven bake version, which we're actually going to do for the other end. And of course you don't need to worry about this drying, I'm assuming, because it's oven bake. You don't have to keep it in an airtight container. So I might just cut this down the middle. And kind of melt them together. So, you know, I mean, that's sort of a much more kind of, I guess, looser form. And, you know, that this might actually look a little bit more realistic in terms of, you know, an older stone wall or stone fence. Right, so we've got these to this stage, so I'm just going to do a little bit of a tidy up, and then we'll get this one here into the oven. And the good thing is we can actually check this sooner to see how it's going. So yep, we'll be back in a tick. Right, okay, so we have our oven tray ready to go, and we're going to position this part of fence. Now I've actually taken a tree out here so I can get it to sort of kind of wrap around a bit here and then work its way up here. Now the idea behind using the clay, and this will be the proof in the pudding really, is that we can now mould this stone wall fence over any undulation and around any corner. So here we go. So it's going to start, we're just going to start up at the top here. It's going to work its way down. So I'll just bring this up. So you know, we can sort of see I've kind of formed and shaped it around the hill a bit. It's got a little bit of a curve in it. So I've just screwed up a bit of tin foil and popped it underneath there. There we go. So it's, you know, in the attempt that it's trying to keep that shape. So I don't know, I mean, this method could be a bit fiddly in the end with the oven baked version. But anyway, we're going to go and shove this in the oven and see what happens. Right, so we're now actually going to plant these in position and see how it goes. So once again, a very experimental and not entirely sure how successful this is going to be. What I'm actually going to do is just run a glob of PVA glue along the bottom edge and basically just pound it in, press it in, and see what happens. Right, so here I've just run some glue across the top and basically just sprinkling more stone chips just to get the ones on the top. I'm not too fussed about if they're going everywhere. I'll just tidy this all up afterwards. Right, so there we go, a stone wall. Now this is the air drying clay or putty. So this will take a wee while for it to dry. And I would say a case of probably quite a few, or I would say a case of several days, being at winter here at the moment, and the air drying will probably take some time. Right, well, a day has passed, and this wall here is actually dried a lot quicker than I thought. I did actually take it inside last night where it was actually a lot warmer in the house, and we've pretty much got a solid stone fence here. Just looking at it as it is at the moment in comparison, I'm definitely preferring and liking the air dry clay as opposed to the oven baked clay. Although, you know, you might get a more instant result with this, it's just this ended up being a little bit more complicated to work with. But, you know, I mean, it's still a reasonably good result. So what I'm going to do now, and you can see the sort of various gaps, and of course you can, in some places, of course, the black is showing through, and also the white clay is showing through as well. So as I always thought, I'm going to go over this and touch it up with a bit of paint. Paints I'm just using paints that I have available, and we've got some Humbrol paint and some Revel. These are both matte enamels, which I'm just going to go through and work through these areas now, and they're sort of similar colours and two different tones. So we'll just work on that now and see how it comes up. So here we have it, the completed stone wall fencing, and I think it's actually come out reasonably okay. There's more for me to add to this. I'm going to add probably some mossy textures, and we will probably also actually run some of this vegetation actually up over the fence here as well. But in terms of the actual method, using this air dry clay and the stone chips with the glue, it actually works out reasonably okay, and the fence is taking the form of the hill, and it's also got, you know, a rustic feel about it. This particular one is probably slightly overscale for when I actually go about doing stone wall fencing on the station road layout. I will make or cut the clay to a smaller dimension. But yes, it's come out pretty well. And I'll have a bit more rubble placed down here just to show that the fence is collapsed. Right, well, there we have it. So I hope you enjoyed today's video. Well, it's actually gone over 2 days now, and hopefully maybe you might consider this particular method of creating a dry stone wall suitable on your layout. So I will bid you all farewell for now, and as always, don't forget to like and also subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Bye for now.